The smell of blood and snow filled her lungs as Zara Patterson stumbled through the white wilderness, each breath burning like fire in her chest. The Montana Territory stretched endlessly before her, a frozen wasteland that cared nothing for her survival, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was going to die out here alone. Her fingers had gone numb hours ago, her boots were soaked through, and the thin shawl wrapped around her shoulders did nothing against the brutal January wind that howled through the mountains like a creature bent on destruction. She had been running for 3 days straight, ever since she escaped from the stagecoach that was supposed to deliver her to a marriage she never wanted. Her uncle had sold her off to a cattle baron twice her age, a man known for his cruelty and his wandering hands, and Zara had chosen the mercy of frozen death over a lifetime of misery. At 20 years old, she had thought herself brave when she jumped from that coach, but now she wondered if she had simply been a fool. The world tilted suddenly, and Zara realized she was falling. Her knees hit the snow first, then her hands, and she tried to push herself back up, but her arms had no strength left. The white ground rushed up to meet her face, and everything went dark. Dalton Irving was carrying firewood from his shed when he saw the dark shape in the snow near his fence line. At first he thought it might be a wounded animal, maybe a deer that had wandered too close to his property. But as he moved closer, his heart stopped. It was a woman, face down in the snow, her dark hair spread around her like spilled ink on white paper. He dropped the firewood and ran, his boots crunching through the frozen crust. When he reached her, he immediately checked for breathing, his rough fingers pressing against her throat. There, faint but steady, a pulse beat beneath her icy skin. She was alive, but barely. Dalton did not hesitate. He scooped her up into his arms, shocked at how light she felt, like she was made of nothing but bones and determination. Her clothes were completely inadequate for the Montana winter, just a thin dress and a shawl that might as well have been made of cobwebs. Whatever had brought her out here, it must have been something terrible. His cabin was small but warm, heated by a large stone fireplace that he kept burning day and night during the winter months. He kicked the door open and carried her straight to his bed, the only bed in the single-room cabin, and laid her down as gently as he could. Her lips were blue, her skin so pale it was almost translucent, and ice crystals clung to her eyelashes. Dalton had lived alone on his small ranch for the past 5 years, ever since he left his family's farm in Nebraska to start fresh in the Montana Territory. At 28 years old, he had grown accustomed to solitude, to the quiet rhythm of caring for his horses and cattle, to talking to no one but himself and occasionally his old dog. But now, faced with this dying woman in his bed, he felt a surge of purpose he had not experienced in years. He knew about hypothermia. He had seen men die from the cold during particularly harsh winters, and he knew that warming someone too quickly could kill them just as surely as leaving them in the snow. He needed to be careful, methodical. First, he removed her wet clothing, trying to keep his eyes averted as much as possible, preserving what dignity he could for this stranger. Her dress was torn in several places, and he noticed bruises on her arms that looked like fingerprints. Someone had grabbed her hard. Anger flared in his chest, but he pushed it down. Right now, she needed his help, not his rage. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, then built up the fire until the cabin was almost too warm. He heated water and soaked cloths, pressing them gently against her hands and feet, trying to restore circulation. For hours he worked, monitoring her breathing, watching for any sign of improvement or decline. It was well past midnight when her eyes finally flickered open. They were a remarkable shade of green, like new spring grass, and they stared at him with confusion and fear. Easy now, Dalton said softly, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. You are safe. I found you in the snow outside my property. You nearly froze to death. She tried to speak, but her voice came out as nothing more than a croak. He quickly poured water from his pitcher into a cup and helped her drink, supporting her head with his hand. She drank greedily, water spilling down her chin, and when she finally pulled away, she looked at him with those extraordinary green eyes. "Where am I?" she managed to whisper. "My cabin about 15 miles north of Los Alamos," he said. "Name is Dalton Irving. What is yours?" She hesitated, and he could see her mind working behind her eyes, deciding whether to trust him. Finally, she whispered, Zara Patterson." "Well, Miss Patterson, what in God's name were you doing out in a blizzard with nothing but a summer dress?" Tears suddenly filled her eyes, spilling over onto her pale cheeks. "Running," she said simply. "I was running away." Dalton wanted to ask more, but he could see exhaustion pulling at her. Her eyelids were already drooping again, and he knew she needed rest more than anything. "Sleep now," he told her gently. "We can talk when you are stronger. You are safe here. I promise you that." She looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether his promise meant anything, and then she closed her eyes and slipped back into sleep. Dalton sat in his chair by the fire, wrapped in his coat, and watched over her through the long night. The next morning, Zara woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Her entire body ached, and when she tried to move her fingers, pain shot through them like lightning. She made a small sound of distress, and immediately the cowboy was beside her. "The pain is good," he said, though his face was sympathetic. "Means the feeling is coming back. You are lucky you did not lose any fingers or toes to frostbite." "Lucky," she repeated, her voice still hoarse. She did not feel lucky. She felt like she had been trampled by a herd of cattle. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "I made breakfast." She realized she was starving. She could not remember the last time she had eaten. "Yes," she said, "but I am not sure I can sit up. Let me help you." He slid his arm behind her back and gently lifted her to a sitting position, propping pillows behind her. His touch was careful, respectful, and Zara felt some of the tension leave her body. This man, whoever he was, did not mean to hurt her. He brought her a plate with bacon, eggs, and a thick slice of bread, and she ate with an urgency that was almost embarrassing. He did not comment on it, just refilled her coffee cup and let her eat in peace. When she finally set down her fork, feeling more human than she had in days, she looked at him properly for the first time. He was tall, probably over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the kind of lean muscle that came from hard physical work. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and needed a cut. His eyes were a warm brown, like whiskey in firelight, and they watched her with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for saving my life, for the food, for your kindness." "No thanks needed," he said, settling into the chair near the bed. "Though I would appreciate knowing what you were running from. If there is someone out there looking for you, I need to know." Zara took a deep breath. She supposed she owed him the truth, or at least part of it. "My uncle arranged a marriage for me, to a man named Cornelius Ashford. He owns a large ranch near Virginia City." Dalton's jaw tightened. "I've heard of Ashford. Nothing good. Then you understand why I ran." She looked down at her hands, at the red marks on her wrists where the ropes had been. "He came to my uncle's house to inspect me, like I was livestock he was thinking of purchasing. He grabbed me, touched me, said things about what he was going to do to me once we were married. So that night, I hid in the stagecoach that was supposed to take me to him. When we were far enough from my uncle's house, I jumped out and ran. "That was 3 days ago," Dalton asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Yes, I stayed off the roads, tried to head south toward Wyoming territory, but I got turned around in the snow. I just kept walking, hoping I would find a town or a ranch or something. Then I saw your fence and I thought I was saved, but I could not make it any farther." She met his eyes. "If you had not found me when you did, I would be dead. But I did find you," he said firmly. "And you are alive. That is what matters." "They will be looking for me," she warned. "My uncle paid a substantial bride price. Ashford will want his money's worth." "Let them look," Dalton said, and there was steel in his voice. "They will not touch you while you are under my protection." Something warm bloomed in Zara's chest at those words. She had spent her whole life being passed from one man's control to another, from her father to her uncle, and then nearly to Ashford. But this cowboy, this stranger, was offering protection with no strings attached. It was almost too good to believe. "I have no money," she said. "No way to repay you for your trouble." "I am not asking for payment," he said. "Just rest and get your strength back. We can figure out the rest later." Over the next few days, Zara slowly recovered. The color returned to her cheeks. The pain in her fingers and toes faded to a dull ache, and she was able to walk around the cabin without feeling like she might collapse. Dalton was a perfect gentleman, sleeping on the floor by the fire and giving her complete privacy. He cooked simple but hearty meals, tended to his animals, and treated her with a respectful kindness that she had rarely experienced. She learned about him in small pieces. He had come to Montana 5 years ago with dreams of building a successful ranch, but the reality had been harder than he expected. He ran a small operation, just enough cattle and horses to keep himself fed and clothed, but nothing grand. He had no family nearby, his parents had both passed, and his only sibling, a sister, was married and living in Ohio. He was, for all intents and purposes, alone in the world. "Does it not get lonely?" Zara asked one evening as they sat by the fire after dinner. She was finally strong enough to sit in a chair instead of being confined to the bed. Dalton considered the question, poking at the fire with an iron rod. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I prefer loneliness to bad company. I worked on a cattle drive once with a crew that never stopped talking, never gave a man a moment's peace. After that, I appreciated the quiet." "I have never had much quiet," Zara said softly. "My uncle's house was always full of noise. He had 7 children, all boys, and they were wild as mustangs. I was there to help my aunt with the cooking and cleaning to earn my keep since my parents died." "How old were you when they passed?" 12. "They both got sick with fever, one right after the other. I went from having a loving home to being a servant in my uncle's house overnight." She stared into the flames, remembering. "My aunt was kind enough, but my uncle saw me as a burden. When Ashford made his offer, my uncle could not sign the papers fast enough." "You have been through a lot," Dalton said quietly. "More than anyone should have to bear." "We all have our burdens," she replied, meeting his eyes. "What matters is what we do with them." A week after he found her, Zara insisted on helping around the cabin. She was not the type to sit idle while someone else did all the work, and besides, she needed to feel useful. Dalton protested at first, saying she should continue resting, but she was stubborn and he eventually relented. She proved to be a capable helper. She took over the cooking, which was a relief to Dalton since his culinary skills did not extend much beyond bacon and beans. She mended his clothes, which were full of holes he had been meaning to fix for months. She organized his chaotic collection of supplies and made the cabin feel more like a home than it had since he built it. In return, he taught her things: how to recognize animal tracks in the snow, how to predict weather by watching the sky and the behavior of birds, how to shoot his rifle, which she took to with surprising aptitude. "You are a natural," he said, impressed, after she hit a target 3 times in a row. "My father taught me when I was young," she explained. "He said every woman should know how to protect herself. Then he died and my uncle took the rifle away, said it was not proper for a lady." "Well, you are welcome to use mine any time," Dalton said. "And your father was right. Everyone should know how to protect themselves." As the days turned into weeks, something shifted between them. The polite distance of strangers gave way to easy companionship. They talked for hours by the fire, sharing stories and dreams. Dalton told her about his plans to expand his herd, maybe buy some of the adjacent land if he could save enough money. Zara told him about her childhood, the happy years before her parents died, when she had a pony named Clover, and used to race through fields with her skirts hiked up, laughing at nothing but the joy of being alive. Dalton found himself watching her when she was not looking, noticing the way firelight turned her dark hair to copper, the way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating on something, the musical quality of her laugh. He tried to tell himself it meant nothing, that he was simply enjoying having company for the first time in years, but he knew he was lying to himself. Zara, for her part, was equally aware of him. She noticed the strength in his hands as he worked, the gentleness with which he treated his animals, the quiet competence with which he handled every task. She had never met a man like him, someone who was strong without being cruel, confident without being arrogant. At night, lying in his bed while he slept by the fire, she thought about what it would be like to have this kind of life permanently, to wake up every day in this warm cabin with this good man. But she did not let herself hope. She had no claim on him, no right to his kindness beyond what he had already given. Soon, she would need to move on, to find some way to make a life for herself that did not depend on his charity. The thought made her chest ache, but she pushed the feeling down. Late in February, a thaw came through, melting some of the snow and turning the world into mud and slush. Dalton rode into Los Alamos to buy supplies, something he had been putting off because he did not want to leave Zara alone for long. But they were running low on flour and coffee, and he could not keep avoiding town forever. Los Alamos was a small mining town that had seen better days. The silver veins had mostly played out, and now it was sustained by ranchers and farmers who needed a place to buy supplies and occasionally get drunk. Dalton did his shopping quickly, wanting to get back home before dark, but as he was loading his purchases onto his horse, he heard a conversation that made his blood run cold. "Ashford is still looking for that girl," one man said to another. "Got posters up in every town from here to Wyoming, offering a $1,000 reward for information leading to her return." $1,000. The other man whistled. "That is a fortune. What did she do? Rob him? Ran away before the wedding? Ashford says she is his legal property since the bride price was paid. He has the law on his side, or so he claims." Dalton's hands clenched around the reins. $1,000 would tempt a lot of men to turn in a frightened woman. He needed to see one of these posters. He found one tacked to the wall of the general store. It showed a crude sketch of a woman, dark hair and delicate features, and offered a reward for the return of Zara Patterson to her lawful guardian, Cornelius Ashford. The poster claimed she was mentally unstable and a danger to herself. Rage burned through Dalton. Mentally unstable. It was a lie designed to make sure that if anyone found her, they would not listen to anything she said, would just drag her back to Ashford like a runaway horse. He ripped the poster down and shoved it in his coat pocket, then mounted his horse and rode hard for home. Zara knew something was wrong the moment Dalton came through the door. His face was dark with anger, and he moved with a tense energy that put her on edge. "What happened?" she asked immediately. He pulled the crumpled poster from his pocket and handed it to her. She read it, and all the color drained from her face. "Mentally unstable," she read aloud, her voice shaking. "A danger to myself. He is making sure no one will believe me if I tell them the truth." "How far does Ashford's influence reach?" Dalton asked. "Does he have connections with the law?" "He has money," Zara said bitterly. "Which means he has connections with everyone. The sheriff in Virginia City is his brother-in-law. He can make any story he wants become the official version." Dalton paced the small cabin like a caged animal. "We need to think about this carefully. $1,000 reward will bring every bounty hunter and desperate prospector within 100 miles looking for you." "I should leave," Zara said, even though the words felt like knives in her throat. "I have put you in enough danger already. If they find me here, they will accuse you of kidnapping or worse." "You are not leaving," Dalton said firmly. "This is exactly what Ashford wants, to isolate you, to make you vulnerable. You are safer here with me than you would be anywhere else. But the risk to you is mine to take." He stopped pacing and looked at her directly. "Zara, I am not going to let them drag you back to that man. I do not care how much money he has or how many lawmen he has in his pocket. You are staying here, and that is final." She wanted to argue, but the fierce protectiveness in his eyes stopped her. This was not just kindness anymore. This was something deeper, something that made her heart race and her breath catch. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you doing this for me?" He opened his mouth, then closed it, seeming to struggle with the words. Finally, he said, "Because it is the right thing to do. Because no one should be forced into a marriage they do not want. Because you deserve better than Cornelius Ashford." It was not the answer she was hoping for, but it was honest, and she respected that. "Thank you," she said softly. "I do not know how I will ever repay you." "Just stay alive," he said. "That is all the repayment I need." They agreed that Zara would need to stay hidden whenever anyone came near the property. Dalton was not a social man, but occasionally other ranchers or travelers stopped by, and they could not risk anyone recognizing her from the poster. He built a hidden space behind a false wall in the cabin, just big enough for her to crouch in if necessary, and they practiced her getting into it quickly. The precautions felt excessive at first, but they proved necessary when a week later, two rough-looking men rode up to Dalton's cabin claiming to be looking for work. Zara barely had time to slip into her hiding space before Dalton went out to meet them. From her cramped position, she could hear their voices, muffled but audible. "We heard you might be hiring," one of the men said. "We are good with cattle, horses, whatever you need." "I am not hiring," Dalton replied coolly. "I run a small operation, do not need extra hands." "That is a shame," the other man said. "You have not seen a woman around these parts, have you? Dark hair, green eyes, about 20 years old. There is a reward for finding her." Zara's heart hammered in her chest. These were not men looking for work. They were bounty hunters. "Cannot say I have," Dalton said, his voice giving nothing away. "But I will keep an eye out." "What did she do?" "Ran away from her intended husband," the first man said. "Poor girl is not right in the head. Her family is real worried about her." "That's so," Dalton said flatly. "Well, like I said, I have not seen anyone, and I have got work to do, so if you fellows will excuse me." The men lingered for a few more minutes, making small talk that was clearly designed to let them look around the property. Zara held her breath, praying they would not ask to come inside. Finally, mercifully, they left. Dalton waited until he was sure they were gone before releasing Zara from her hiding spot. She stumbled out, her legs cramped from being folded up. "That was too close," she said, her voice shaking. "They knew to come here. Someone must have told them you live alone, that you might have seen something." Or they are just checking every ranch in the territory, Dalton said, though he looked troubled. Either way, we need to be more careful. That night, Zara could not sleep. She lay in the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Dalton's quiet breathing from his place by the fire. The walls felt like they were closing in. How long could they keep this up? How long before someone found her? She must have made some sound of distress because suddenly Dalton was there, kneeling beside the bed. "What is wrong?" he asked gently. "I am scared," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I am so tired of being scared, of running, of hiding. I just want a normal life, but I do not think I will ever have one." "You will," he said firmly. "I promise you this will not last forever. Ashford will eventually give up and move on. Men like him always do." "You do not know him," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He does not give up on things he thinks belong to him. He will keep looking until he finds me." Dalton reached out and gently wiped the tears from her face, his rough thumb surprisingly tender against her skin. "Then let him look," he said. "He still will not have you, I will make sure of that." "Why do you care so much?" she asked, searching his face. "You barely know me." He was quiet for a long moment, his hand still cupping her cheek. Then, so softly she almost did not hear him, he said, "Because somewhere along the way you stopped being a stranger I was helping and became someone I cannot imagine being without." Zara's breath caught. "Dalton, you do not have to say anything," he said quickly, starting to pull away. "I know I have got no right to feel this way, that you have been through too much to deal with a cowboy who has gone and fallen for you, but I needed you to know the truth." Before he could stand, she grabbed his hand. "I feel the same way," she whispered. "I've tried to tell myself it was just gratitude or relief at being safe, but it is more than that, so much more." He stared at her, hope and disbelief warring in his eyes. "You mean that?" "Yes," she said, and saying it out loud felt like stepping off a cliff. "I love you, Dalton Irving. You are the best man I have ever known, and I love you." He leaned forward and kissed her, gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. It was nothing like the grabbing, possessive touches of Cornelius Ashford. This was warmth and tenderness and a question being asked and answered. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you too," he said. "And I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to be afraid again." They married in March, in a small ceremony performed by a traveling preacher who came through the territory. Zara wore a simple blue dress that Dalton had bought her, and he wore his best shirt. There were no guests, no family, just the two of them and the preacher and the Montana wilderness as witness. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Dalton kissed her like she was the most precious thing in the world, and Zara knew she had finally found what she had been searching for her entire life. A home, a partner, a love that was freely given and freely received. But their happiness was shadowed by the knowledge that Ashford was still looking. The posters remained up in towns across the territory, and they heard rumors of his men asking questions, checking ranches, refusing to believe that a woman could simply vanish. Dalton and Zara discussed leaving, going somewhere Ashford would not think to look, maybe Oregon or California. But Dalton had put 5 years of his life into building his ranch, and the thought of abandoning it made him sick. This was his home, and now it was Zara's home too. He was not going to let Cornelius Ashford drive them away. "We need to end this," Dalton said one evening in April. "We cannot keep living like this, always looking over our shoulders." "What do you suggest?" Zara asked. "We cannot fight him legally. He has the law on his side." "Maybe we do not fight him legally," Dalton said thoughtfully. "Maybe we fight him in the court of public opinion." He had been thinking about this for weeks, turning it over in his mind. Ashford's power came from his money and his reputation as a respectable cattle baron. But reputations could be destroyed, and men who preyed on vulnerable women were not generally admired, even in the rough and tumble world of the Montana Territory. "We need witnesses," Dalton said. "People who will testify to your character, to the fact that you are not mentally unstable. And we need to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man Ashford is." Over the next few weeks, they carefully built their case. Dalton rode to Los Alamos and spoke to the shopkeeper who had always been kind, to the doctor who had treated him when he broke his arm 2 years ago, to other ranchers who knew him as an honest man. He told them the truth, that he had married a woman who had escaped from an arranged marriage to a cruel man, and that now her former intended was trying to claim she was his property. The response was better than he had hoped. Most people were sympathetic. Arranged marriages were common, but forcing a woman into one against her will was another matter. And when Dalton mentioned Cornelius Ashford's name, several people had stories to share about his cruelty, his dishonesty in business dealings, his treatment of workers. "I worked for Ashford for 6 months, one ranch hand told Dalton. "He beat a stable boy near to death for letting a horse get loose. The boy was only 14. I quit that day and never looked back. I sold him 20 head of cattle," a rancher said. "He claimed half were sick and refused to pay full price. They were not sick. He just wanted to cheat me." These stories, combined with Zara's own testimony, painted a damning picture. Dalton wrote everything down and took it to the new territorial judge, a man from back east who was not connected to Ashford's network of influence. The judge read through the statements, his face growing grimmer with each page. When he finished, he looked at Dalton and said, "This is quite an accusation you are making against a prominent citizen." "It is the truth," Dalton said firmly, "and I have witnesses willing to swear to it." "And your wife is willing to testify as well," Dalton hesitated. Bringing Zara into a public courtroom would put her directly in Ashford's sights, but it might be the only way to end this for good. "She is," he said. "She is scared, but she is brave. She will tell her story." The judge leaned back in his chair, thinking. Finally, he said, "I cannot promise anything. Ashford has powerful friends, but I will review this evidence, and if I find it credible, I will issue a ruling nullifying any claim he has on your wife. She married you of her own free will in the Montana Territory, witnessed by a legitimate preacher. That should be enough to make his contract with her uncle void. It was not a guarantee, but it was more than they had before." Dalton thanked the judge and rode home to tell Zara. She was terrified at the thought of testifying, but she agreed. "If this is what it takes to be free," she said, "then I will do it." The hearing was set for late May in the territorial courthouse in Helena, the capital. Ashford was summoned to appear and defend his claim. Dalton and Zara made the journey with an escort provided by the judge, a precaution against Ashford trying to seize Zara before she could testify. Helena was the largest town Zara had seen in years, bustling with miners, politicians, and businessmen. The courthouse was an impressive building, 3 stories of brick and timber, and Zara felt very small as they climbed the steps. Inside, Cornelius Ashford waited with his lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. Ashford himself was exactly as Zara remembered, mid-40s, thick around the middle with cold blue eyes and a mouth that turned down in perpetual disapproval. When he saw her, his expression darkened with rage. "There she is," he said loudly, "my runaway bride. Stolen by this cowboy and held against her will." "That is a lie," Dalton said, his voice hard as iron. "She came to me of her own accord, fleeing from you." "Silence," the judge ordered. "We will hear testimony and then I will make my ruling." "Mr. Ashford, you may present your case first." Ashford's lawyer stood and presented the contract between Ashford and Zara's uncle, a legal document that promised Zara in marriage in exchange for $500 and a herd of cattle. The lawyer argued that since the price had been paid, Zara was legally bound to fulfill the contract, and her marriage to Dalton was invalid because she was still under her guardian's authority. Furthermore, the lawyer said, there is the matter of Miss Patterson's mental state. Her uncle will testify that she has a history of erratic behavior, and running away from her legal obligations is simply more evidence of her instability. Zara felt sick listening to these lies, but she kept her face calm. She had to be strong. When it was their turn, Dalton's lawyer, a young man named Samuel Green who had agreed to take their case for a minimal fee, stood and called Zara to testify. She walked to the witness chair on shaking legs, very aware of Ashford's eyes on her. The judge asked her to state her name and age for the record. "Zara Patterson Irving," she said clearly. "I am 20 years old." "Mrs. Irving," Samuel said gently, "can you tell the court why you ran away from your uncle's house?" Zara took a deep breath and told her story. She spoke about her parents' deaths, about being sent to live with her uncle, about him arranging her marriage without asking her wishes. She described Ashford's visit, his rough handling of her, the things he said that made it clear he saw her as an object he had purchased, not a person he intended to cherish. "I was terrified," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I knew that if I went through with the marriage, I would be trapped in a life of misery, possibly even danger. So I ran. I risked freezing to death because that seemed preferable to what awaited me." "And how did you come to be at Mr. Irving's ranch?" Samuel asked. "I collapsed in the snow outside his property. I was dying. He found me and saved my life. He gave me shelter, food, and respect, asking nothing in return. Over time, we came to care for each other, and when he asked me to marry him, I said yes because I love him and because I wanted to spend my life with a good man, not because anyone forced me." Ashford's lawyer cross-examined her, trying to make her admit that she had been coerced or that she was lying about Ashford's behavior, but Zara held firm. She had lived through too much to be intimidated by words. Then Samuel called the witnesses who testified to Ashford's character. The ranch hand who had seen him beat the stable boy. The rancher he had cheated. A woman who had worked as a maid in his house and quit after he cornered her in a hallway and made unwanted advances. With each testimony, Ashford's face grew redder, and his lawyer looked increasingly uncomfortable. Finally, the judge called for a recess to consider the evidence. They waited in a small room, Dalton holding Zara's hand tightly. "You were amazing," he told her, "so strong and brave." "I do not feel brave," she admitted. "I feel like I might be sick." "We will know soon," he said. "One way or another, this will be over." After an hour, the judge summoned them back. He looked stern as he settled into his chair, and Zara's heart pounded so hard she thought everyone in the room must be able to hear it. "I have reviewed the evidence and testimony," the judge said. "And I find that, while the contract between Mr. Ashford and Miss Patterson's uncle may have been legal at the time it was made, it was entered into without the consent of the primary party, namely Miss Patterson herself. Furthermore, the testimony regarding Mr. Ashford's character and behavior casts serious doubt on his fitness as a husband." Ashford shot to his feet. "This is outrageous. I paid good money." "Sit down, Mr. Ashford," the judge said coldly. "I am not finished. Miss Patterson, now Mrs. Irving, made a legal marriage to Mr. Dalton Irving in the Montana Territory, witnessed and documented. That marriage supersedes any previous contract. Furthermore, I am issuing a restraining order preventing Mr. Ashford from approaching, contacting, or harassing Mrs. Irving in any way. If he violates this order, he will be arrested and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Relief flooded through Zara so intensely that she thought she might faint. Dalton's arm came around her shoulders, steadying her. "This is not over," Ashford snarled at them as he stormed out. "I have friends in high places. You have not heard the last of me." But his threats rang hollow. The judge's ruling was final, and as word spread through Helena about what had transpired in the courtroom, Ashford's reputation took a severe blow. People who had respected him as a successful businessman now saw him as a man who tried to force a young woman into marriage, and then lied about her mental state to get her back. Dalton and Zara stayed in Helena for a few days to make sure all the legal paperwork was in order, then made the journey back to their ranch. As they rode through the Montana wilderness, Zara felt like she could breathe freely for the first time in months. "It is really over," she said wonderingly. "I am actually free." "You are," Dalton confirmed, smiling at her. "And now we can start thinking about the future instead of just surviving the present." Their future began to take shape over the following months. With the threat of Ashford removed, they could focus on building their life together. Dalton expanded his herd, bought some of the adjacent land he had been eyeing, and began to establish himself as a successful rancher. Zara proved to be a valuable partner, managing the books, handling correspondence with buyers, and earning a reputation as a shrewd negotiator. They also became active in the Los Alamos community. Zara helped establish a school for the children of ranchers and miners, teaching them reading and arithmetic in a small building the town erected for the purpose. Dalton served on the town council, working to bring more infrastructure and services to the growing community. A year after their marriage, Zara discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and a little terror. They were going to be parents, responsible for a whole new life. "What if I am not good at it?" Zara worried, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "What if I do not know how to be a mother?" "You will be wonderful," Dalton assured her, kissing her forehead. "You are the strongest, most capable person I know, and you will not be doing it alone. We will figure it out together." Their son was born in February of 1885, during another Montana snowstorm. The doctor barely made it to their ranch in time, and Dalton paced the cabin like a caged wolf until he heard the baby's first cry. When the doctor let him in to see his wife and child, Dalton was overwhelmed with emotion. Zara looked exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with tears of joy streaming down her face. "Meet your son," she said softly. Dalton carefully took the baby, marveling at how small he was, how perfect. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he opened his eyes, they were a deep blue that might eventually turn brown like Dalton's or green like Zara's. "What should we name him?" Dalton asked. They had discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at their son, Zara said, "What about James? After your father." Dalton's father had died when he was young, but he remembered him as a kind, hard-working man who loved his family. "James," he repeated. "James Irving, I like it." Being parents was harder than either of them expected, but also more rewarding. Late nights and endless diaper changes were offset by moments of pure magic. James's first smile, his first laugh, the way he would grasp Dalton's finger with his tiny hand and hold on with surprising strength. As James grew, 2 more children followed. A daughter they named Alina in 1887 and another son, Thomas, in 1889. Their ranch house, which Dalton had expanded to accommodate their growing family, was filled with noise and laughter and the organized chaos of raising 3 young children. Zara sometimes thought back to that frozen day when she collapsed in the snow, certain she was going to die alone. It felt like a lifetime ago, like something that had happened to a different person. That frightened girl running from a forced marriage had become a confident woman, a mother, a partner in a successful ranch, and a respected member of her community. One evening, when the children were asleep, and she and Dalton sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, she said, "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had not found me that day?" Dalton was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Probably quieter," he said with a slight smile. "Definitely lonelier. I would still be that solitary cowboy, eating bad bacon and talking to myself." He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me. You brought life and love and purpose to this place. You made it a home. You saved me," Zara said softly. "In every way a person can be saved. You gave me safety when I had none, love when I thought I would never have it, and a family I never dreamed possible." "We saved each other," Dalton corrected. "You think you needed me, but the truth is I needed you just as much. I was existing, not living. You taught me the difference." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple. Inside the house, they could hear one of the children stirring, probably Thomas, who was a restless sleeper. "I should go check on him," Zara said, but she did not move immediately, not wanting to leave this perfect moment. "In a minute," Dalton said, pulling her closer. "Let me hold you a little longer." As the years passed, the ranch continued to prosper. Dalton became one of the most respected ranchers in the territory, known for his fair dealing and his quality cattle. Zara's school grew, eventually becoming a permanent fixture in Los Alamos with 2 other teachers to help manage the increasing number of students. Their children thrived, growing strong and healthy in the Montana wilderness. They heard occasional news of Cornelius Ashford. His reputation never recovered from the scandal, and his ranch fell into decline. Eventually, he sold it and moved back east, a bitter, broken man. Zara felt no joy in his downfall, only relief that he was no longer a threat. When Montana achieved statehood in 1889, Dalton and Zara were invited to the celebration in Helena, recognized for their contributions to the community. Standing in the crowd, watching the American flag being raised over their new state, Zara felt a profound sense of belonging. This was her home, these were her people, and she had fought hard to earn her place here. As their children grew older, James showed an aptitude for ranching and announced his intention to take over the family business someday. Eleanor surprised everyone by becoming fascinated with medicine after the town doctor let her assist with treating an injured ranch hand. She declared she wanted to become a doctor herself, a lofty ambition for a girl in the 1890s, but Dalton and Zara encouraged her dreams. Thomas, the youngest, was still figuring out his path, but he had inherited his mother's head for numbers and seemed destined for business. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1905, Dalton and Zara took a rare trip without the children, riding out to the place where he had found her all those years ago. The landscape had not changed much. The same mountains rose in the distance, the same wind whispered through the grass, the same sky stretched overhead. "I cannot believe it has been 20 years, Zara said, dismounting from her horse. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday." "Sometimes it feels like you have been part of my life forever," Dalton replied, coming to stand beside her. "Like there was never a time before you." They had both aged, of course. Dalton's hair was shot through with gray, and lines weathered his face. Zara had silver threads in her dark hair, and the hands of a woman who had worked hard for 2 decades. But when they looked at each other, They still saw the people they had fallen in love with, the cowboy who saved a stranger and the woman who brought warmth to his lonely cabin. "If I could go back," Zara said, "and tell that terrified girl in the snow what her life would become, I do not think she would believe me. This happiness, this peace, it seemed impossible then." "But you fought for it," Dalton reminded her. "You could have given up so many times, but you did not. You ran into a blizzard rather than accept a life you did not want. That took incredible courage." "Or incredible foolishness," Zara said with a smile. "I could have died." "But you did not," Dalton said, echoing the words he had spoken to her so long ago. "And I found you." And everything that followed was worth every moment of fear and uncertainty. They stood there for a while, hand in hand, remembering and being grateful. Then they mounted their horses and rode back to their ranch, to their children and grandchildren who would start arriving in a few years, to the life they had built together from nothing but determination and love. As they approached their home, now a substantial house with a barn, corrals, and outbuildings, Zara felt a wave of contentment wash over her. This was her kingdom, small perhaps in the grand scheme of things, but perfect in every way that mattered. She had escaped darkness and found light. She had run from cruelty and discovered kindness. She had collapsed in snow outside a stranger's home, and he had carried her inside and into his life, giving her everything she had ever wanted and more than she had dared to dream. "I love you," she said to Dalton as they dismounted in front of the house. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," he replied, pulling her into his arms. "My Zara, my brave, beautiful, perfect wife." Their children called to them from inside, needing something, asking questions, living their loud, chaotic lives. But for one more moment, Dalton and Zara stayed there, holding each other, two people who had found exactly what they needed in each other. The Montana wind blew soft and warm, carrying the scent of wildflowers and sage. The sun shone bright in a cloudless sky, and in that moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Years continued to pass in gentle progression. James married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, and they built a house on the far end of the Irving land, planning to eventually take over the ranch operations as Dalton slowed down. Eleanor defied expectations and went to nursing school in the East, eventually returning to Montana as one of the first female doctors in the state. Thomas opened a mercantile in Los Alamos that quickly became the most successful business in town. Grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with young voices and laughter again. Dalton built a larger dining table to accommodate everyone for Sunday dinners, which became a sacred tradition. Zara would cook enormous meals, and the whole family would gather, 3 generations sharing food and stories. On one such Sunday in 1912, when Zara was 52 and Dalton was 60, their entire family was assembled. James and his wife Sarah with their 4 children. Eleanor, visiting from her practice in Billings, regaling them with medical stories. Thomas and his new bride Margaret, married just 3 months earlier. The table was crowded, voices overlapping, children squirming in their seats, and it was perfect. After the meal, as the adults sat on the porch and the children played in the yard, Eleanor said, "You two have built something remarkable here, not just the ranch, but this family, this sense of belonging." "We just loved each other and tried to be good people," Zara said simply. Everything else followed from that. "It is more than that," James interjected. "You gave us a foundation. You taught us that family means showing up for each other, no matter what. That hard work and honesty matter. That love is not just a feeling, but a choice you make every day." Dalton looked around at his children and grandchildren, his heart full to bursting. This legacy, these people, they were his greatest achievement, far more valuable than any amount of cattle or land. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the grandchildren begged for a story. This was another tradition. Dalton or Zara would tell tales of the old days, of building the ranch, of life in the wild Montana territory. "Tell us how you met," the oldest grandchild, 10-year-old Daniel, requested. "That is my favorite." Zara and Dalton exchanged a smile. They had told this story many times, but it never got old. "It was a long time ago," Dalton began. "Back in 1884, when Montana was still a territory, and winters were even harder than they are now. I was living alone in a small cabin, working my ranch with just my hands and my determination. And I was running away from a terrible man who wanted to force me into marriage," Zara continued. "I was scared and desperate, and I made the foolish decision to run away in the middle of winter with nothing but the clothes on my back." The children leaned in, even though they had heard this story before. There was something magical about it, something that spoke to the power of courage and love. "I collapsed in the snow right outside your grandfather's fence," Zara said. "I thought I was going to die. Everything went black. But I found her," Dalton said, "lying there in the snow, nearly frozen. I carried her inside and worked for hours to save her life." "And then you fell in love," Daniel said confidently. "Not right away," Zara corrected gently. "First, we became friends. We learned to trust each other. Your grandfather showed me that not all men were cruel or selfish, that some were genuinely good. And I like to think I showed him that he did not have to be alone." "Then the bad man tried to take Grandma back," another grandchild chimed in, a girl named Lucy who was 8. "He did," Dalton confirmed. "And we had to fight in court to prove that Grandma had the right to choose her own life, her own husband." "And you won," Daniel said triumphantly, "because you were right and he was wrong." "We were lucky," Zara said. "We found a good judge who listened to the truth. But yes, we won. And then we could finally start our life together without fear. And now we are all here because of that," James said, looking around at his siblings and their families. "Because Grandma was brave enough to run into a blizzard and Grandpa was kind enough to save a stranger." As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to emerge, the family slowly dispersed. Children were gathered up and taken home, promises made to visit again soon, hugs exchanged. Finally, it was just Dalton and Zara again, sitting on the porch in the comfortable silence of people who had spent decades together. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Zara asked. "After you found me and brought me inside," Dalton thought back across the years. "I said a lot of things that night." "You promised me I was safe," Zara said. "You looked me right in the eyes and promised I was safe with you, and you kept that promise. Every single day for 28 years, you have kept that promise." "It was the easiest promise I ever made," Dalton said, taking her hand. "Keeping you safe, making you happy, it has been the purpose of my life." They sat there until the night grew cold, until the stars were brilliant overhead, until they could hear the lonely call of an owl in the distance. Then they went inside their home, the home they had built together, and they held each other close. Two souls who had found each other against all odds and built a life more beautiful than either had imagined possible. As they grew older still, Dalton's strength began to fade. His hands, which had worked so hard for so many years, developed arthritis. His knees troubled him, making it difficult to ride for long hours. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Zara never wavered. Zara herself faced the challenges of aging with the same determination she had shown throughout her life. When her eyesight began to fail, she learned to navigate her world by touch and memory. When her joints ached, she found ways to work through the pain. They took care of each other with tenderness and patience, each anticipating the other's needs. On a crisp autumn day in 1920, Dalton suffered a heart attack while working in the barn. James found him and carried him inside, and the doctor was summoned, but they all knew it was serious. Dalton was 70 years old and had lived a hard life. His body was giving out. Zara sat beside his bed, holding his hand, and for the first time in decades, she felt the cold fear of loss creeping back in. "Do not look so worried," Dalton said, his voice weak but still touched with humor. "I am not going anywhere just yet." "You better not," Zara said fiercely. "I am not done with you, Dalton Irving." He smiled, that same warm smile that had won her heart so many years ago. "We have had a good run, have not we? 36 years of marriage, 3 wonderful children, more grandchildren than I can count, a ranch that is still thriving. No regrets, Zara, not a single one." "Me neither," she whispered. "You gave me everything I ever wanted, a home, a family, a life worth living." "You gave me the same," he said. "I was just existing before you, just going through the motions. You taught me what it meant to really live." He recovered from that heart attack, though he was never quite as strong afterward. He could no longer do heavy work, but he could sit on the porch and watch his grandchildren play. He could hold Zara's hand and tell her stories. He could feel the sun on his face and know he was blessed. 2 more years passed in gentle decline. Dalton celebrated his 72nd birthday surrounded by his family, and as he looked around the table at all the faces he loved, he felt a profound sense of peace. That night, as he and Zara lay in bed together, he said, "I want you to promise me something." "Anything," Zara said. "When I am gone, I do not want you to spend the rest of your life grieving. You are still young enough to have years ahead of you. Live them, Zara. Enjoy your children and grandchildren. Keep teaching. Keep being the remarkable woman you are. How can you ask me not to grieve?" Zara said, tears already forming, "You are my heart, Dalton. You are the best part of me. And I will always be with you," he said gently. "But grief should not be the last chapter of your story. Promise me you will keep living, really living." "I promise," she whispered. Though the thought of life without him seemed impossible, Dalton Irving passed away peacefully in his sleep 3 weeks later on a cold November night. He simply did not wake up. The doctor said his heart had finally given out, that he had gone without pain in his own bed next to the woman he loved. As far as deaths went, it was a gentle one. Zara grieved deeply, as anyone would who had lost their partner of 38 years. But she kept her promise. She did not let grief consume her. She threw herself into her grandchildren's lives, teaching them to read, telling them stories about their grandfather, making sure they knew what an extraordinary man he had been. She lived for another 8 years, remaining active and engaged with her community until the very end. When she died in 1930 at the age of 70, it was surrounded by her children and several of her grandchildren. Her last words were about Dalton, about how much she had loved him and how grateful she was for the life they had shared. They buried her next to him on a hill overlooking the ranch, where they could watch over the land and the family they had built together. The headstones were simple, bearing their names and the years they lived, but to those who knew them, they represented something far greater. They represented courage in the face of fear, love in the face of hardship, and the building of something lasting and good. The Irving Ranch continued to thrive through the generations. James's children took over after him, and their children after them. The original cabin where Dalton had carried Zara on that frozen day in 1884 was preserved as a family shrine, a reminder of where it all began. Every year, on the anniversary of the day Dalton found Zara in the snow, the family gathered at the ranch to celebrate. They told the story to the new generations, making sure no one forgot the remarkable love story that had started their family line. The tale of the cowboy who saved a woman from freezing to death and ended up falling in love with her became something of a legend in Montana. People told it in bars and around campfires, each telling adding a little embellishment, but the core truth remained the same. Dalton Irving had been a good man who did the right thing at the right time, and it had changed his life forever. But more than that, it was a story about courage, about a woman brave enough to choose potential death over certain misery, about a man kind enough to help a stranger with no thought of reward, about two people who found in each other exactly what they needed and built a life of purpose and love. As the decades passed and the Wild West became a memory, as Montana grew and changed and modernized, the Irving family remained rooted in the values that Dalton and Zara had established: hard work, honesty, kindness, the courage to do what was right even when it was difficult, love freely given and gratefully received. And somewhere, in whatever lies beyond this life, Dalton and Zara were together again, holding hands as they had done so many times in life, looking down on their legacy with pride and joy, knowing that their love story would continue to inspire generations yet to come. The end.